Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation that feels urgent and necessary, but also hopeful. I'm Jasmine Hood Miller, Director of Family Engagement and Community Partnerships at Common Sense Media. I'm delighted to be joined today by some really amazing guests, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, I want to set the stage for this discussion. Common Sense is a national nonprofit organization committed to helping kids and families thrive in an age of nonstop media and rapidly evolving technology. We provide families with media and tech guidance. We provide schools with digital literacy curriculum, and policymakers and industry leaders with research backed strategies on designing a world where we put kids first. Our most recent research report is titled Boys in the Digital Wild: Online Culture, Identity, and Well-Being. And in conversation with our guests today, we will discuss the findings of this research and, most importantly, provide parents with what they can do with this information. As a mother of three boys, this literally hits home for me. And I hope that for everyone watching this webinar, they will be able to take away a tip or a tool that can help them better support their sons, nephews, grandsons, or any young boys in your life. Our goal is really to begin with an overview of kind of here's the landscape, and then go into here's what it means, and then wrap up with here's what we can do about it. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome our speakers. I'll begin with my colleague, Daniel Vargas Campos. Daniel is the Senior Education Program Manager at Common Sense. He develops research backed educational resources that support young people to thrive in a digitally interconnected world. Prior to joining Common Sense, Daniel was a graduate instructor and researcher at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Education, where he studied the impact of educational technologies in the lives of students from non dominant backgrounds. He holds a master's in social and cultural studies from UC Berkeley and a BA from Tufts. So, welcome, Daniel. Next, we have Dr. Saeed Hill, a counseling psychologist and independent consultant. Dr. Hill is the harm reduction and community support specialist for Yale University, where he specializes in promoting pro social masculinities, wellness, and violence prevention. He provides coaching, training, and strategic consulting on topics related to domestic and global prevention, and has been featured across various media platforms discussing the manosphere, restorative justice, and how AI shapes the identity and relationships of men and boys. Dr. Hill has worked with national organizations, schools, and nonprofits to promote healthy masculinities and outreach efforts. He has a PhD from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, has advised the White House Task Force to address online harassment and abuse, and is president-elect, the incoming president of the APA Society for the Psychology of Men and Masculinity. And when he's not doing all of that, I hear he likes to watch reality TV, kayaking, and recreating his mother's best Guyanese food dishes. So welcome, Dr. Hill. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Lynetta Cunningham, aka Mama Work. Lynetta is an educator, entrepreneur, youth development advocate, and co-founder of Teamwork, a nonprofit organization that challenges youth to level up to their full potential. Lynetta has over 30 years of entrepreneurship and youth development expertise, specializing in character development, online safety, and mentorship. A respected speaker and educator, Lynetta translates research into actionable impact for families and communities. She runs Teamwork with her three adult children who are successful gamers, content creators, and actors, and they bring that real experience and family dynamic to building safe, inclusive, online and in-person communities through gaming clubs, teen late nights, and workshops. Teamwork's mission centers on fostering responsible gaming, healthy habits, and robust digital citizenship. Lynetta and her team teach online safety and practical life skills that open doors to tech and digital media careers while actively addressing bullying, violence, and risky behaviors on and offline. And then last but certainly not least is Dr. Kareem Edouard. Dr. Edouard is a assistant professor for Drexel University's School of Education, where he oversees the Illis Lab, a makerspace using science and STEM-related engagement for arts, fashion, and media, and is open to students at the university and across Philadelphia. Dr. Edwards' research interests lie in understanding the intersectionality of race, culture, and STEM engagement for students of color. He's also a former high school teacher and children's media consultant, serving as a creative producer for PBS Kids' Work It Out Wombats and the upcoming animated series Built from Scratch, which my boys are excited about. Kareem earned a bachelor's degree in media education from DePaul University, a master's degree in teaching from the University of Southern California, and a PhD in learning sciences and technology design from the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. You all are like, your resume is just banging. I think we're all really privileged to have you here. So, welcome everyone. Okay, so we're going to just get started. And Daniel, I'm going to kick it off with you. You are unofficially our trends reporter at Common Sense. You are very tapped into what kids are doing online and have helped me know what my kids are talking about when something's popping or
Mhm.
viral. This report really dives into the type of content boys are seeing in their social feeds, in group chats, and video game platforms. So, for parents who might not know what their sons are watching, can you paint a picture of what we're calling digital masculinity content, these reoccurring themes around money, muscle, women, and weapons that's showing up? And what does that actually look like, sound like? And what are the explicit and implicit lessons that are being taught about what it means to be a real man?
Totally. Thank you for the introduction, Jasmine. I think being someone that's really plugged into like trying to understand what the conversation, what the experience of young boys is. I feel like the first thing that we need to understand is that the kids' digital lives is very complex, right? They go online to connect socially, to consume content, so they have interactive experiences, passive experiences. What we try to do with this latest study that our research team released is to really understand um, what is the sort of content that kids are consuming once they find themselves in these digital spaces. And the findings are really interesting. I think that one of the top line findings that our research kind of like unearthed is that 73% of boys regularly see content that communicates some form of idea about what it means to be a man. And so like this content really is pervasive, 73% is the majority of young boys. And a lot of the content that they kind of gets to them has to do with things like how to have financial success, how to improve your personal appearance, and the further you get into the rabbit hole, like, the more sort of like extreme the content gets. But for the most part, like the content that most kids are boys specifically are being exposed to is this sort of like aspirational content that tells you what you should aspire to in terms of being a man. And like financial success is really one of those key kind of like driving forces that's getting kids really interested in this sort of content. I also think it's really important to note that out of that 73%, um, really 23% of those young boys experience like high levels of exposure to like that type of content. And it is this group of like smaller group of boys where we start seeing some of like those very pronounced negative impacts that this type of content has on like their self-esteem, their social connection, and their overall well-being.
Thank you. So, can you walk us through? You mentioned this rabbit hole. Like, how do boys kind of tumble into this rabbit hole? What are the on ramps to both harmful and helpful content that tends to appear, and how is this showing up for them?
Yeah, I think that the what's really important to note is that we are currently living in at a time where the main way we all are exposed to content is through the algorithm. So if you think about it, young people are almost always in a kind of like a passive state when content gets to them. So it's kind of the algorithm is organically surfacing masculinity related content to boys, and once they watch it or start to engage with it, that's how they kind of start getting down a rabbit hole. So like the signals is really, it's really like the rabbit hole, the entry point to the rabbit hole is really like aspirational content. So let's say financial success is the one that that I've been talking about. So this idea of you get an influencer that's talking about things like how do you make money, how do you invest, how do you put yourself in a position where you could be down the line a quote unquote provider. And so usually we'll start with that type of mindset of, you know, how do you aspire, like how do you achieve this thing down the road. um, and the finances are a big part of it. Dating advice is a big another kind of like alternate entry point into the rabbit hole. Because if you think about it, like young people, young boys, they're consuming this sort of content at a very pivotal moment in their development. You know, like the teenage years is when they're having questions about who they are, who they want to be, and kind of like influencers are giving them that guidance. And so the entry point to the rabbit hole is like, you know, someone like a kid wanting to better understand themselves, and the rabbit hole just kind of like takes them uh, to ever more extreme places.
Mm. So you mentioned that kind of like aspirational entry point, right? So they're looking to these content creators, and our research, shows that these influencers have a significant. They're looking at them as a significant source of guidance and emotional support because of that aspiration.
Hmm.
Is there anything that surprises you about the masculine content and creators that are resonating with teenage boys right now? And, maybe help parents understand, like, what the appeal is.
Yeah, so what I think is interesting about all this is that you know, at first glance, a lot of this content really seems innocuous to people, right? It's like it might be an influencer talking about um, how to how to study for a test, like how to improve your study or like learning habits. um, and then that could be the entry point, right? It's like it's kids are experiencing like a challenge in their offline lives. Maybe it's the pressure to perform academically, or the pressure, let's say student athletes who are interested in like just improving their athleticism, you know, might go online and see content that is really helpful for them, that it really answers questions that they have or concerns that they have. And even so, like they see it as helpful, they create this kind of like one-way relationship to the content that they're consuming. And what really is surprising about this is that boys are kind of like being put into like this no-win situation where they're getting a lot of emotional support or coaching from the influencer content that they're consuming, but at the same time, the more of that content that they consume, the more likely they are to like not want to open up to their real life friends. And so like
Mm.
that's when we start seeing the tensions. Like um, is that's what's the tricky thing about the digital content, right? It could be helpful, but once you know, like go past a threshold, and once your consumption of that sort of content becomes more on like the extreme side, you know, this starts really impacting your ability to seek help outside of the digital environments. And so you kind of like get into like this negative feedback loop.
That is actually, I think, the perfect segue, because I wanna turn now to Saeed, and have you share your insights into what this means for in terms of boys' identity development and well-being. Um, like, as Daniel just mentioned, and listening to the news, reading articles, and just talking to boys directly, there's this sense that, they're feeling a bit misunderstood. They don't have, people to reach out to or have conversations with in person in their, I don't like saying in their real life because it all is their real life. And but they may be feeling a bit alienated. So what are you seeing in terms of how these online messages about masculinity are showing up in boys' mental health, in their anxiety, their sense of self-worth, and how they're relating to others?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Jasmine. So it's everywhere. It's rampant. I think some of these online masculinity messages are just amplifying a lot of what I might call really restrictive aspects of being masculine. So, for example, I think a lot of these boys and young men are learning that there's a pressure to perform. Almost like masculinity is a performance at all times. It's always about posturing. It's about appearing a certain way, always appearing like you have the most money, you're in the most control, you're the most powerful. I often kind of make the joke that masculinity is like pro wrestling or like drag. It's like amplified up to 100 on these online message boards or the online content and media that folks are engaging with. So, there's this pressure to perform. There's also this pressure to really hide your vulnerabilities. This idea that being a man really means being self-sufficient and being stoic, never letting them see you sweat. That kind of vibe. And so this idea of any kind of vulnerability makes you weak and makes you less than a man. So if there's any sort of vulnerability to me, then I can't be a man. So I have to kind of show up in a way that's very invulnerable, which we know is not a very human way to be, but that's also
Mhm.
what a lot of people are learning. Or that you have to conform to really narrow definitions of what it means to be men, specifically even around like appearance. We've talked about this a little bit already, but this idea of like you have to look a certain way, you have to have the muscles a certain way, you have to be a certain height. I'm 5'2" actually. I'm like 5'10" on a good day, but like for a lot of places and spaces in the online narratives around masculinity, like I'm less than a man. I'm not a man, right? And because of that, um, I'm not in that club, that man club. But really, what it means underneath that and the clinical part of it, it's about lower self-esteem, and that's what it brings on. Adopting these narrow or rigid or restrictive aspects of masculinity writ large really means I'm having lower self-esteem, I'm increased loneliness, more emotional suppression, I'm feeling more anxious, and I'm having a lot more of catastrophic like self-talk. So going along with those statistics about all the regular masculinity content a lot of these boys are engaging with, if I can't adhere to this rigid aspect of masculinity, then I'm going to start telling myself stuff. I start to ruminate. A lot of the young men I work with talk about ruminating, up late, coping in really maladaptive ways, whether it be substance use, maybe potentially increased pornography use, going to AI instead of a human being for some sort of validation. So, the common sense report really like spells out a lot of this, but there's such high pressure, and I think that that's where the restrictive nature comes in. If people are feeling really restrictive and pressured, we have to find ways to really relieve that pressure and stress. And I think a lot of that is through modeling and telling the truth about what it means to be men, which is it means to be human. And we need people to be more human. And a lot of this online content is steering you away from that.
And in your practice, are you seeing digital content like being part of the story as you're working with young men, that they are referencing or talking about the things that they're seeing in their feeds? Is that part of it? And kind of what does the path forward look like to help boys or young men rebuild a healthier sense of self that is, kind of the antithesis of some of this problematic content that they're seeing, where they have more permission um, to do all the things that you just described that just make us human, right? And be able to relate to each other.
Yeah, the digital content is definitely a big part of, I think, some of the masculine identity development that's going on. What's important to remember is not a lot of people are asking questions about the online world and lives of these boys and these young men,
Mhm.
and we absolutely need to be. I think those conversations, are they happening? In my clinical work, I mean, I'm asking young men about like, well, what's the social media use look like? Do you use AI? What's your online life look like? Because we know at a time where less and less people are turning toward humans because they may not feel that sort of validation, or they may feel that loneliness and isolation, they're using technology more for that sort of social support and coping. And so, first of all, we have to be asking more of those questions. So I think it's a larger part of a lot of these young men's lives than we may even imagine. At the same time, one of the things I do is I ask if they can trust me, with it. I'm like, let's study the game tapes a little bit. Let's look at the algorithms. Let's look at what is being fed to you, what the media is. What are you being marketed on a daily basis? So for some young men, I might even ask to see like, hey, why don't you show me your explore page, your for you page? Let's go over it together. What are these videos and clips that are being fed to you? What is it learning about you and your needs? And how is it using that against you at times, right? Like some of this might be helpful content, and we don't want to disparage or shame folks for their online media use. But at the same time, we have to have that digital literacy and putting that into place. So, for example, with a lot of young men, I'm talking about how, hey, have you noticed that a lot of these messages about being men is so much about external validation and very little about your internal. So this idea of like, do you have enough money? Do you look a certain way? Do you have a certain kind of job, or whatever it means to be a high value man, right? Like a lot of this is all about external validation to achieve something as opposed to feeling really good about yourself. So, this is a really rigid script that you're not equipped to always have, right? And so, we need to really like talk a little bit more about that and unrestrict that part of it. I also think like these messages about like, hey, if I'm weak if I show feelings, right? Well, I'm doing one-on-one work with folks, and you might be talking to young men in your life too. It's important to validate and say, like, hey, I know you might believe that, but is that true? Like, I don't see you that way. Like, I think
Mhm.
that's actually pretty strong that you're doing that, pretty brave that you might be going into it. It's not easy to do these sorts of things. It's not easy to be human in 2025 for a lot of folks, right? So, talking about that, modeling that, and creating a safer space for them to really like open up is really sort of helpful. I think group interventions are really helpful too. So if you can get some of these young men into smaller groups, whether they be online or in person, to practice with each other, affirming each other, vulnerability with each other. Peer modeling is so powerful with each other. And hey, like opening up their social world to see other people feel this way too, and we can talk about it. And then at the community and like maybe school level, really like building into your curriculum media literacy, really getting into like how the media influences things like gender and culture. Talk about the algorithms, as folks have talked about, right? Let's really get into it and talk about what the messaging really looks like. So, um, you know, I'd also say like sometimes practice with like a friend. If you have a trusted friend in your life, start to help them practice like being more vulnerable with these friends in their lives or people in their lives, and then making sure we're also training people to receive that sort of vulnerability too. So I think these are some like ways that we could really be helpful.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to the group work and having peers to engage with, but I did want to um, just touch on very quickly when you talk about going through the feeds with um, boys that you're working with, and we know that algorithms have bias, right? And we know that uh, a feed for one teenage boy can look very different from another teenage boy based on where they are, what they engage with, and other kind of factors that feed into that algorithm. Also, we know that there are different cultural contexts to defining manhood, and so I'm curious um, how you see boys from different racial, ethnic, religious, or socioeconomic backgrounds navigating these digital masculinity messages. Are there boys that are more vulnerable to or protected from this type of content based on the cultural definitions of manhood that they're also receiving at home and in their communities?
Sure. So I'd say in a lot of communities where well, first of all, it's important to remember, according to a lot of different research, about 75% or so, it's always around three quarters of young men say that they get their ideas of what it means to be a man from a father or a father type figure in their lives, right? And so most of the time, we could talk about these digital algorithms and all sorts of things, but many times our young men are growing up in situations where they're observing what masculinity is, and it's very much tied to their community and the men in their communities, right? So whether it be their fathers or not. In those communities where manhood is really tightly tied, I'd say, to things like being very stoic, being the provider, and running your household, and these sorts of things, those online messages that integrate things about toughness or financial independence, or even I'd say financial dominance, may really resonate with those folks, right, that come from those sorts of communities. That which is familiar is comfortable, and that which is unfamiliar is uncomfortable. So even if it's not always good for me, if I'm used to a certain type of message in a specific type of community, and I get those online messages, then it's going to reinforce a lot of those beliefs. The issue is that it might intensify that sort of pressure, and that's where we sort of have to come in and talk about that sort of pressure and the unrealistic expectations that these algorithms are sort of feeding you about what it means to be a man. So sort of separating, like, hey, there's a balance in your community. Like, no one is trying to say that, hey, you can't be stoic sometimes, or it's bad to be a provider, or like you can't be really a leader of your family or anything like that. But it's talking about, like, hey, you can't be necessarily all those things at all times, and there's a real
Mhm.
cost to trying to stay in that box at all times, right? um, Similarly, in those communities where like emotional expressiveness is really like normalized, and people are a little bit more vulnerable in that sort of thing, whether it be through family, the church and faith is a big part of this, cultural rituals. Maybe some families are more touchy feely and that sort of thing. I mean, these online scripts often clash with that sort of message from your home life. And so sometimes it can also play this trick on you and say, like, oh, is there something wrong with even how I'm being raised? So because all these other men are like this. So I think sometimes we have to come in and kind of talk about, like, hey, this sort of identity conflict you might be having, like, we need to provide a little bit of a buffer against that sort of thing. And so, and similarly, at a time where there's a lot of like socioeconomic like upheaval and uncertainty in the world, if I, as a boy, and we know most men and boys and also most women and girls also define what it means to be a man based on your ability to provide, at a time when social economic stuff is like all over the place, that causes a real identity crisis for a lot of our boys. And so the socioeconomic aspects of this too, tied to things like race, and ability and status and these sorts of things, can pose a lot of issues. And so you're really getting this one dimensional portrayal of what it means to be men and boys. And so this is why we need stronger intergenerational mentoring in communities and schools, whether it be coaches, faith leaders, educators, therapists, your extended family involved. There's a lot of protective anchors we can put into place in the communities to help buffer against the full impact of some of these online messages that can lead to more a radicalized way of being.
I love how you all are perfectly segueing into like each part of this conversation, because everything you just said, Saeed, is now what I kind of want to turn to Lynetta and Kareem about, because you are working directly with youth. And in the study that we did, we found that adolescent boys live and connect online. 94% use social media and games daily, and most boys find a sense of belonging in gaming. Even though they also recognize that there's problematic behaviors in some of those spaces. But you are both creating in-person spaces where young people can come together, game, do STEM activities. And what are you seeing, or what are teen boys telling you about why these spaces matter to them, and what needs are being met here, either in online or in those in-person spaces, and kind of like what might be um, valuable for them there that they might not be getting at home or at school.
So we do an intake, and so I saw this question and I looked at what the youth are saying. They are looking for a place to belong. They're looking for a place to connect. Just like we hear about code switching and things like that. They have a whole different language, a whole different community, and so they're looking for a place where they can just connect with other people that have similar likes and community. Some of them want to, all of them at some point say they want to improve their skills when it comes to gaming, but they're looking for a social connection. They're looking um, for to be around people that like what they like. I think very similarly, some of our one student said, "Well, my brother goes to football, so this is my this is my football."
Mhm.
And so I think it's for all the things. I think and they're aware of all the other benefits of gaming. whether it's collegiate, where they can get a scholarship, whether they can get drafted, or they see other people their age making money doing this thing, but or coding, or just all the opportunities when it comes to gaming and careers. But a lot of them, they're just there to hang out. They're there to get some food. They're there to
Mhm.
um, make friends outside of gaming. It's where you have a gaming club, and some of them are 3 hours long, but maybe they're playing video games for less than an hour of that. It's really just about being part of a community, a place to belong, human interaction.
And I would think it would, I'm assuming it's similar for you, Kareem, or how does it look in your space?
So, excuse me. So part of it, the research that we're doing at the Illust, really centers around how there is ownership in the content and the gaming that they engage in. So, like, I wear two hats, right? So, as an academic, I'm researching, really thinking about how Black boys. So, I center my work around Black boys because of two things. Number one, they tend to be marginalized for when we're engaging their discourse within these kind of STEM and tech spaces, and then they're also the highest penalized when it comes to then making these discourses around what it means to be a man, a boy, right? So we always age up Black boys, young boys into men when we now start to enter punishment territory, right? So that's the first part of it. The second thing is really thinking about, well, how these boys say to themselves, well, I want to be able to shift and change that narrative. So that's the second thing I do. So for me, as a children's media content producer, I would always find myself, particularly being the only Black male in my spaces, right? So even if it's a show that I'm working on PBS, I'd be the only Black male. Or even in consulting spaces where I'd be the only Black male, and they would always turn to me and say, "Hey, for you, tell us what Black boys want." And I started to kind of think about, well, where is a space for particularly Black boys, brown boys to be in a space where they can vocalize and share not only their feelings, but to have that agency to engage. So at the Illest, that's what I developed, right? So I developed the Black male animation program, which centered on getting Black boys to be able to want to engage in these kind of creative spaces, particularly in animation, as anime, manga, video gaming become the very kind of cornerstone for many of these creative Black boys. And then we started to find something to be very clear. Number one, there were tropes about Black males and what they like and what they wanted that was consistently being produced around cultural and pop media. Number two, social media itself was really driving that, right? So algorithmically, it was sharing what Black boys particularly wanted, and it wasn't reflecting what the community of these boys really wanted to kind of engage in. So then I would ask them, well, what is the opportunity for you to develop and share narrative? And as was shared earlier, they turned to community, right? So I work with young men in West Philadelphia. So that's where the research takes place. And they were always talking about how to make communities much more safer, how to bring industry to the community, right? So that was part of that. And they would create these narratives. So one of them is a project that I was working on where we were having a connection with Transformers. So I'm kind of old. I'm in my late 40s or mid 40s, I should say. And I loved growing up with Transformers. And we were finding out that these 10 to 15-year-old boys were engaging in that same conversation with Transformers, and we were building opportunities for them to 3D print, design, create, and then shoot stop motion films with these Transformers. So there was two things that was taking place, right? So we were creating this kind of cultural connection through our parasocial engagement with Transformers, almost 40 years distance with each other. But at the same time, we were building, right? They were using the tools in the making space to construct not only the characters, right, through a computational making framework, but then they were also using their voices. So they had these Transformers, which were mech designs, but they were telling the stories of how they wanted to be heroes and improve their communities. So it was at that point I started to realize that the narrative power, right, was where we needed to really try to engage these boys, where they had to transition from just consuming the content and now started to producing the content. So for me, as a content creator and as an executive producer, I turned and looked at two places. Number one was live action. What was in the ether that had Black boys and Black men at the center of STEM engagement? And it was very little. So, in creating Maynard's Wild World of Science, right, which was a show that we developed that had Black men, Black boys at the center of telling science phenomenon, that was the first part. The second part, when you look at animation and game design, you also had Black boys who either were sidekicks, right? Never the central character, or even more nefarious many of times were those characters that needed to be defeated. So when we created Built from Scratch, which had Black and brown boys leading teams, they were now using the animation space as part of how do we create design, STEM, engineering principles that were part of a fun action adventure animated series that center Black boys. We have a leader in Jamal as the lead of the team, right? And these were kind of images that were set in my lab and in my research that Black and brown boys were not seeing themselves. So I close it by saying that turning to these boys, particularly those who are marginalized, and Black boys and brown boys, who not only don't get to see themselves in these examples, right? They don't get the resources to be able to develop and create this, right? But more importantly, when they do get access to these resources and platforms, they tend to turn to community and want to advocate for themselves. And now the next level to this is being able to platform their stories, their narratives, so it has not only a wider distribution, but it able to create a much more critical mass as to how they build their identities in these spaces.
Yeah, wow, that's really it's amazing. And I think that it's actually a very, very critical point in where we talk about all of the online kind of content and engagement that boys are having, but pairing that with the in-person community and having that balance between the two. It's not to say that it's not an either or, right? Like I think some parents want to feel like you have to shut off games, shut off, your phone and go outside and run and play. But you need both, right? This is the world that we're living in. They're not completely um removing one aspect or the other from their lives, kids, because it's just the reality that they live in. And so if you can find ways to bring what they're doing on their with tech on their devices, all of those things in media to having those in-person opportunities, those in-person connections, mentors, coaches, all of those things, that I think is actually where we can, I feel like, find more of a common ground as parents with boys, um, and kids in general, honestly. Lynetta, you are a mom of gamers, right? Like your son is has made a career for himself in gaming and then has
Right.
turned back to creating spaces for kids. And so when I think about, we get questions from parents, kind of like where the parent may have this kind of framing or thought of, they are essentially anti-tech, right? They're telling their kids um, that technology is bad or that they're using it too much, but they want to reframe the conversation and they want to be able to have conversations. We know that real world relationships are crucial for boys. Mental health and their self-esteem. And we also heard in the research that boys are having conversations with their parents, but they're not actually finding them very helpful or productive about what it means to be a man. And so as a parent, you know, what are ways that we can open up those conversations with our kids? How did you not shy away from gaming for your son?
It was one of those things that he loved to do. We got him involved in all types of sports, but gaming was one of those privileges in our house. And I just I wanted to learn more. I knew it was something that motivated him. I knew it was something that he loved. And his father was one of those, you're not going to be playing video games all day and get outside. And so we just tried to pair the two. Um, and I think that he was really involved in wanting us to give back because there are kids are searching for opportunities. Um, they love rules. Like people think they don't, but they do. They want to know their boundaries. They want to know where the fence is, where they can go. And so we helped with Marcel. We helped create those guidelines. We call him the guinea pig. He's 35 now. And so we started with gaming used to not be online. And so just I had to learn with him what he was looking at, what he was doing, having those conversations. I think it would be similar to me asking questions about football, knowing that I'm not playing, but I'm still interested. I'm interested in why you like this team, why you like this influencer, why you like this game. Asking those kind of questions, but then also seeing the different opportunities in it. There were so many other things outside of gaming that he just really appreciated, which was the relationships. And games have there's so much reality in game content creation that I didn't know about. Like kids know about history through video games and whatnot. But for us, I had to embrace it. And my other two children also loved gaming, and I learned so many skills that they were learning. They're way more advanced than at STEM or any other online thing. I'm always having to ask them to help me when it comes to this kind of technology things. There's a different language. There's just so many things that I was inspired by their desire, and just I think we come from not really being able to choose what we want to watch and when we want to watch it, because TV channels controlled all of the programming. And I think when it came to being online and gaming and YouTube and all these other things, it was opening this world up to them that I needed to be aware of where they're going. And so for me, I also found that, like you said, there's so many parents that it's just such a taboo space. It's such a scary space. And it can be. And so we wanted just to open the doors and be able to help families and parents and help give guidelines, and then also echo some of the things that parents are saying, like whether it comes to expectations online, or how they're operating, or who are they connecting with. We wouldn't normally let you say, don't let anyone in your house when you're not home, but they can go to the Netherlands or whatever else. And so just having those, learning to have conversations with kids so that they can even go home and talk to their parents and kind of tell them what they need as well. Because there's so many different respects when it comes to gaming. Like you, sometimes it's like, get off the game right now. And, but you would never pull your kid off the court if it ran into overtime. And so just teaching parents and families kind of this respect and language of in-house, online, and how do we respect it, and how do we create space where like-minded kids and parents are. We encourage parents to have kids come over and play video games. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's so many opportunities where these two things can be great in development, stress relief, all these fun things. And I think that if we focus more on providing, if parents knew more about it, they'd be able to educate their kids into where to lead them how to operate and move through this digital world.
Yeah, I think that you and Kareem both touched on something that um, is really, I think, critical too is thinking about the empowerment of how kids can take gaming or, um, other kind of tech related, whether it's coding, 3D printing, like all these different activities, and be creators and not just consumers of it. And then that, opens up another world for them to be able um, to have some kind of control and some ownership of what they're doing. And also just to like give parents a different viewpoint of how they're engaging in these spaces. And even if it's just like you said, for like stress relief or um just, having different value than what we just see as just like a waste of time, right? And along with that is like this digital literacy aspect of it, which is crucial for them to be able to be those creators and producers versus just the passive consumer. And so uh, I guess I'll kind of let you all wrap up with a closing thought on how we can better promote these conversations of digital literacy with kids, but also how to bring parents into being open to be interested in and know what's going on with their children. And I can throw it to anyone who wants to jump in.
I'll jump in first. We're actually in a very unique time with parents and young folk, is that we now have millennial parents, right? Like myself, um, 80s and 90s parents, who we grew up with AOL, AIM, Napster. So we understand the assignment. And as I like to call us, we have like survivor's remorse, because for many of us, we were latchkey kids. We spent 18 hours watching television, coming home after school. And that generation was also the test bed for how we engage in connected online learning. Mimi Ito, a scholar within this space, talked about that and framed and thinking about this kind of connectivity within this late 80s, 90s generation. And part of that survivor's remorse conversation I always have is that it always tends to be us, as we overthink that, put the iPad down or don't be in front of your computer this long, where we knowing well that we were in the computer rooms with the all wood desk from Office Depot on our computers, playing Oregon Trail. So I say that because this generation particularly has this opportunity to really think about how they can do this co-engagement process, right? Because we spent so much of our time online prior, including prior to the previous generation. And really, there's two ways to kind of think of this, right? Is one, as parents, to reclaim that joy that we once had when we were playing those Marios, Oregon Trails, being on AIM, and connecting, right? It's kind of think about how we used to communicate, whether in some cases not so good, but we'll push that for another time. But that kind of joy when we were opening and playing with our Dells and Gateway 2000s, right? And then the other thing is to really think about that this generation has this opportunity, particularly when you sidestep some of the nefarious and more toxic areas, but how they can be productive. And then you can be productive along with them. So for my students, I create with them. It isn't just building curricula and then handing it off and then grading or being on the sideline. I engage with them. And as I was sharing the story of our love for Transformers and bringing those kind of cultural touchstones together, even with my daughter, I do the same thing where we're on Scratch Junior with 3D printing. Boys also celebrate that because they work in groups, know how to engage in groups in those kind of group activities, is to look at how we can build those opportunities. And I'll say this as a common link to what was shared earlier. You wouldn't pull your boy or your son off the court in the middle of overtime, right? So let's look at this as this opportunity, as was shared, as overtime, right? That these young men, these young boys are in this kind of critical moment where they're looking for, as was shared before, these kind of rules and guidance to support. And then we think about how we used to engage in these online spaces and build those kind of collaborative opportunities where narratives can be created and shared. Video games, there's a lot of these game companies that are bringing prior IPs from our past into these new systems. And then I say all this because then that creates that common language, that commonality to build together. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kareem. I find this kind of same train of thought for me with my kids, where when they are deep in flow in what they're uh, creating or doing, whether it's Scratch or Minecraft or things like that, where have been told before screen time needed to be like very rigid and like it- you know finite. But if I know what they're doing and I'm engaged and I have an understanding of like, okay, they're in the middle of creating their work, like their mind is really working right now. And so if I just say shut it off right now, like kind of creates this friction. And so I think even just having that awareness of what they're doing, but also like how they're engaging with it, kind of changes the way we parent with it too, because it's not just a switch to flip. It's understanding like, okay, maybe we need to create like transition time and process or whatever, but it's also respecting that what they're doing is valuable to them. Daniel, I want to throw it to you if you have any kind of final thoughts.
Sure. Well, so there's some like big ideas that I kind of like want to tie together. Saeed, you talked about like this idea that masculinity is like a performance, and something that really struck me from both Lonetta and Kareem's conversations, like this idea of voice and belonging. And really, my parting thought is, as a new dad of a baby boy, just really thinking about how do we create those spaces, whether they're physical, in person, or digital, where kids are able, specifically boys, are able to tap into their voice. We know that they want to participate, they want to contribute, um, but we don't want masculinity to feel like a always on performance, right? Part of being uh, a man also means like, how do you let people in? And so like creating those spaces where kids, boys are able to be not only able to participate but also to open up to peers, to adults in their life. I think is essential. So it's like really about finding um, this kind of like more balanced, nuanced approach to how we think about manhood, both digitally and offline.
Lynetta, any final thoughts?
Um, I got so many. I think it's never too early to start thinking about being online, and it's never too late to start getting involved. I think that there's so many ways that you can curate your algorithms. I think as parents, we can be the example of just how we operate um, when we're online, when we're on Facebook. Um, I think also when it comes to gaming, they have a gamer tag, and so I think that gives them, that's kind of their alter ego, but they're also themselves, and they're able to walk literally, like operate in this world under this gamer tag and just kind of experience things. And I think that with the safety of parents or um, trusted adults, trusted peers in their lives, that they're, as long as they have someone that they can turn to and kind of be like, I saw this, and there not be any judgment when it comes to asking questions. I think listening to your kids. I think we heard earlier, like we used to play video games. I put a few quarters in the machines back in the day, and so just understanding that it's also an outlet. There are career opportunities, there's college opportunities, there's so many great skills um, that kids can learn, whether it's gaming or being online, whether it's having a meeting or presenting themselves or doing college applications. It's okay to be online. And so just your kids are probably more ahead of you than you think. And so I think you can learn something from kids too. I think having a
Mhm.
conversation of being curious when it comes to it is okay. It's like, who are you following and why? And what game is that? And why do you like that game? And just like you would how was your day at soccer? I think that would be beneficial. I think um, kids want, like we saw earlier, they do want to talk to their parents. They do want to talk to a trusted adult. They do want to see um, if what they're seeing online translates, and vice versa. So I would say if you have a kid that's a gamer and wants to be online, find a space that combines both, whether it's a gaming club, a coding club, content creation, so that they can also get real world experiences and human connection, something that they're already designed to create, to crave, actually. And so those would be my final points.
Thank you. Yeah, it is just natural, right, that we want to be with each other. Saeed, can you give us just some kind of like final closing thoughts on, whether it's definitions of manhood, masculinity content, anything, all of the above?
Sure. Yeah. No, I wanted to go back to Dr. Kareem about all the nostalgia I was hearing for him. I was waiting for the Legends of the Hidden Temple, discussion too, and Nickelodeon. But yeah, similar to what Lynetta was talking about just now. I mean, I think showing up really curiously is the number one thing you can do. I mean, there's so many parents I talk to and folks who engage with children and these young boys who are always trying to teach them something and they're not really listening, and so these questions about like what are you into and why or what's interesting about that, in couples and family therapy we often call it turning toward your partner or turning towards somebody, so as opposed to like judging someone's behavior or trying to get them to do something different, sort of asking them more questions about like what's the reason you're into something. So showing up really curiously is really helpful, I'd say. Also know that there's just such this is sort of going back to, this sort of sense of belonging that a lot of boys are looking for. What's important to remember is that a lot of boys find themselves in spaces online because they're looking for that sense of belonging and they don't want to feel rejected. And that can
Mm-hmm.
look multiple ways. But in one context, sometimes boys are finding a lot of like influencers online and that sort of thing, or people online who really like co-sign every single thing that they do, no matter how negative it might be or like poor behavior it might be and that sort of thing. And when you talk to boys about that, like what's interesting or why do you follow some of these men who seem to be really struggling in their own relationships and have this really rigid idea of what it means to be a man and stuff, a lot of it is this idea of mm, like the lack of punishment in that sort of space. So I guess what I want to kind of say about it is that we can't really have this conversation about boys and online behaviors and stuff like that without acknowledging that a lot of boys are very much punished for like behavior, punished for like acting differently. And it's not always that they're doing something that's like harmful or violent. I think sometimes you see in schools boys being disproportionately punished, for behaviors, or a lot of boys not realizing that a lot of boys are struggling with like behavioral issues or learning disabilities and thinking of it as like something that we need to punish. Many boys are growing up real thinking that they're always going to be punished or even incarcerated, for things. And I think sometimes we need to like have a more gentle like sort of way or approach or a curious way of approaching boys, especially when it comes to our black boys and our brown boys too, which we know disproportionately face a lot more punishments in schools and that sort of thing. So I think there's a larger conversation also about how we approach discipline and what our boys are learning about how easily discardable they are and how easily punishable they are. And are we leading with love? We always talk about tough love. In my community, my dad, folks in my life have always talked about we need to toughen these boys up. It's all about tough love. But we do an amazing job of the tough part and we forget about the love part. And so, what are ways that we can really show and express that love for
Mm-hmm.
our boys is going to be really important. And some of that is like real quick stuff like, hey, I notice you're being really quiet lately. I'm here for you if you want to talk. Feeling stuff is normal and I want to hear about it. I want to hear more
Mm-hmm.
of what's going on with you. You don't always have to go in there with an agenda. Just like I'm here for you and just making sure that you're repeating that for folks, right? And then the last thing I'll say is that a lot of boys tell me that they don't feel like they can tell anybody or they can't talk to anybody. I can't tell somebody anything, or I can't, no one's there for me, in this sort of thing. And what I'm hearing in that is this lack of like safety and support that boys might be experiencing. And so a lot of boys are afraid of being judged and teased and things like that. And so just making sure that we're leading with that curiosity, leading with that love, and kind of showing like, hey, we want to know you. We don't want that performance. We don't need that and everything. You can tuck that away. And maybe us as men, I'll speak for myself as a man, and I need to do a better job of modeling that too. And for those of us who aren't men and boys and want to speak to them, are you equipped to like handle the vulnerability, or are you also learning to reject that sort of vulnerability from these boys? So we need to do a better job. All of us need to do a better job of thinking of what our biases are toward these boys too, and how that might come out in conversations. So lead with love, lead with curiosity, and I'm with everybody else on this panel for sure.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I could just keep talking and listening to you all all day. But I just really, really appreciate this rich conversation. So thank you all for participating and sharing all of your just kind of insights and wisdom and expertise. I've learned so much and will take it back to my family. And I think the word of the day is curious. Be curious. If we make time and space for our kids to share with us the things that interest them, including video games and social media, they will open up and tell us what's going on with them. Ask questions and not judge, even if it's not your thing. And to do this early, as I think Lynetta mentioned, so that as they grow and things get trickier or more complicated, that they know that they can come to you no matter what. So thank you all again so much for our viewers who are watching this. If you want to get more information, see the research, you can sign up for our newsletter, download our app by visiting commonsensemedia.org, and take care, everyone.